Hi, long time no see you in this room. I'm Casey. This is I Don't Know What I'm Doing, and this is my September wrap-up. If you're new here, I talk about books. I do some bookish things. Sometimes shit gets a little wild, because, you know, your back decides to just quit on you because you're in your 30s now. We do experimental wrap-ups, but here's a normal wrap-up, which is hopefully going to be, you know, going back to how we normally do it so you don't get content that's obscenely long. I read 8 books in the month of September. We are going to go in the order that I read them in because that's what I took my notes on. Without further ado, here we go. And we're going to try to not have each book take an obscenely long time, although I always have issues with that. Okay, so the first book that I read in September was Pet Sematary by Stephen King. I listened to the audiobook of this. It was narrated by Michael C. Hall of, you know, Dexter and other things, and I enjoyed it. Overall, this was a 3-star book for me. I am coming to discover this year that parental horror is not really something that is necessarily in my wheelhouse. I don't have kids. I have no intention of having kids, and it just doesn't hit the same for me as I think it does for a lot of people who do have their own children and do want their own children. I've seen the 1990-something movie at least a half a dozen times in my life, and I've always very much enjoyed it. I was very surprised that one of the main differences between the movie and the book is that the book has a much slower pace. It is far slower. It's not necessarily a long book, but it waits until about the last third for the action to really start and for, you know, a lot of the more famous scenes from the book and from the movie to really start taking place. It's such a smart decision for this book because the slow setup and the longer pace of it really gives you such a full sense of the family dynamics and the friendship dynamics that they have with Judd, and whenever everything starts happening, it really does have an impact. This is the point in time when I realize I haven't given you a synopsis of this. Pet Sematary is about the Creed family. They are moving across the country into a old house in Maine, and it is the husband Lewis, the wife Rachel, and their 2 young children. Whenever they move, they discover that their home is just off of a very busy road, and where a lot of semis come through, and they come through at very fast speeds, and their neighbor Judd warns them about keeping their animals in and keeping an eye on their kids. They begin a friendship with Judd and his wife Norma, and Judd shows them around the town, shows them that their property is actually really near a pet cemetery that the town has used for a long time, and it might have some properties, and that all comes into play later, and then there's a lot of horror in there. I tried to read the physical book several years ago, and I found Lewis to be completely insufferable reading it physically. Having him narrated through an audiobook was actually a lot more tolerable for me. But this was 3 stars for me. I enjoyed it, but I think that other people will get a lot more out of this than I possibly did. The next book I have is my favorite of the month of September, and that is Queen of the Cicadas by V. Castro. This novel follows a woman in her mid-30s, Belinda Alvarez. She returns to Texas, where she was born and raised, to go to a friend's wedding, and she doesn't know whenever she signs up to go to the wedding that this is actually the site of a very famous Texas folklore of the Queen of the Cicadas. She stays on the property where this bed and breakfast is being held, where the Queen of the Cicadas was born. She slowly starts to fall into the mythos a lot more, and becomes determined to find out what happened to this young migrant worker named Milagros decades before. It's almost 2 timelines kind of converging towards each other. At the end, you're like following Belinda and Hector and a couple of other characters in one. You're also following Milagros as she is moving from Mexico amid some controversy, trying to make a better life for herself and finding work in Texas, and the horrible things that happened to her. This was absolutely 5 stars for me. This was beautiful. It was really vulnerable and really sweet. Also has some of the most terrifying mental images in here that I've ever had from a book. I really enjoyed it. I do really love this author's writing so much. A couple months back, I read Goddess of Filth by this author, and I really wanted to read a full-length novel from her. I really wanted to see what she could do whenever she got a chance to really stretch her legs and tell her story over a longer course of time. And it's absolutely wonderful. It's absolutely fantastic. I can't recommend this one enough. Okay, the next one I listened to the audiobook for, and I don't have a physical copy of, and that is The Final Girl Support Group by Grady Hendrix. This is 2 stars for me. I did not really enjoy my time here, and I was very disappointed. In this novel, you are following a number of women who have been labeled final girls because of the tragedies and traumas that they have suffered, and it is taking very popular American slasher franchises and taking them and putting them into this story in this world and saying that, you know, these things actually happen to these women, and through, you know, shady business dealings or something, their horror and their trauma has been turned into popular film franchises. But there are real life women dealing with the long-standing emotional damage and physical damage from these events. As I said just a moment ago, this was a major disappointment for me. I have enjoyed the other 2 Grady Hendrix books I've read immensely, and I feel like the things that he did very well in the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires and My Best Friend's Exorcism were absolutely flatlined in this book. The characters were so hard to distinguish from one another for the vast majority of the book. And whenever you're discussing a large group of women, especially women who are supposed to be kind of these facsimiles to like the Sidney Prescotts and the Laurie Strodes in our universe, they should have had more personality, and not just personality. They should have had a lot more gumption and been more. And all the characters felt very flat. They were very hard to distinguish from one another in the support group itself. Overall, I thought the premise for this novel was really solid. I thought the themes that were presented in it were also really good, but I think where it really failed was in any sense of exploration of those themes or any fleshing out of that premise. These women who have been through these tragedies, these hardships, these horrors, they should have had more to them. And there should have been more exploration of what something like that can do to a person, and not just condensing them down into the addict or the socialite or the shut-in. It really failed to do much more than make them 2D caricatures of what a real person would be. And I was so disappointed with that. I love characters in books so much. I want to read about these characters and dive into their lives and find out about what they've gone through and how they've dealt with everything. And they were just so flat. It was just hard to root for anyone or cheer anyone on. And that's not even mentioning the plot itself, which was full of holes and lackluster twist after twist after twist after twist. It was so all over the place, and I wanted so much more from this novel and got none of it. The next book that I read was Senselessness by Horatio Castellanos Moya. This is a translated work. It was translated by Catherine Silver. I have no idea how to even begin to describe the plot to this, but I guess I'm going to make an effort here. A man has fled his home country. He is living in South America, and he has fled his home country due to some very unpopular opinions that he has about his local government, and his government not having very popular opinions about him. He has found himself doing some work for the Catholic Church in a different country. His friend has given him this opportunity. He is to help edit down some pages that were transcribed from indigenous peoples who had dealt with a massacre in their community. And this is sort of his descent into not only that work, but his own flaws and his own warped perception of the world and himself. That's about the best I can do to describe the plot of it to you. This was quite a difficult read. I ended up giving this no rating on Goodreads because I can't even begin to try to make sense of all my thoughts and feelings of this in a way that translates to, you know, a 1 through 5 stars. I enjoyed it, might not be the right word. It was so bizarre. The writing choices in here are very distinct and very intentional. There are just sentences that go on and on and on for paragraphs of length, and it's so in this character's head, and historically I really enjoy that, and I really enjoyed this. This man is, to put too fine of a point on it, he's kind of a piece of shit, but he's at least an interesting piece of shit to read about. He's such an asshole and a terrible person, but he's so strange and bizarre, and I think that this was such an interesting piece of fiction, and I'm really glad that I read it. It's very short, but I ended up reading this over several weeks because it's one of those things that I just couldn't sit down with and read the entire thing in one sitting. I'm really glad I took my time through this, and maybe someday I'll have some more thoughts and more cohesive thoughts to talk about, but I kind of don't think I ever will. But I did enjoy this. I recommend it if you're looking for a kind of Chuck Palahniuk style, I guess, is the closest thing I could compare this to. But if you're looking for a translated work that's going to make you very uncomfortable and kind of make you think a little bit, then I would recommend this one. The next book that I read is The Mercies by Kieran Millwood Hargrave. This is following a community of women in Norway who have suffered the loss of the majority of the men in their community due to a massive storm that capsized all their boats. You're also following a young woman from a different community in Norway who has just been betrothed or married to a Scottish preacher who is just a vile human being. As they move to this community of women who have dealt with so much over the past few years and try to, I guess, insert themselves in there. This was a beautifully written book. I primarily listened to the audiobook, which I highly recommend. It's beautifully written. I was really surprised that it was sapphic. I wasn't expecting that. I knew very little about this. This was one of those that I saw recommended and I grabbed the library copy without doing any research into what it was, but it was sapphic. It was just full of longing and wanting and this sort of, pining for someone from afar for so long. By the end of it, I was completely engrossed. I was so won over by all of these women, everything that they were enduring, and it was a beautiful time. The ending for this is what pushed it into 5 stars for me versus a 4-star. I like an ending that's not afraid to not pull punches and to just deal in some absolute realism and some difficulties, and I really enjoyed this one quite a bit. Next book I read was The Dangers of Smoking in Bed by Mariana Enriquez. This is a short story collection. This was 4 stars for me overall. And this is my favorite short story collection that I've maybe ever read. This has some of my favorite short stories in it that I've ever read. I keep thinking about several of these all the time, even though I finished this a week and a half ago. And I can't recommend this enough. It's a lot of horror and magical realism and some surrealism, and it was absolutely beautiful. It's telling a lot about life in Argentina and the people of Argentina, and I thought it was just absolutely incredible. The next book that I finished, did not start this month, started it several months ago, it finally fucking finished. It's Wizard and Glass by Stephen King. I've done vlogs for the other 3 books, and I am not doing one for this one because it took me so long, and I finally caved and grabbed the audiobook on Scribd because I was stuck at around here for about 3 months. I was not picking it up. If I did, I was reading 2 paragraphs and then moving on. And I finally caved and grabbed the audiobook, and I'm glad I did. I'm glad I can knock this off of my currently reading. I am really happy to be done with this one. This is 4 stars overall for me. I do still really love this. I think it's really beautiful. I think it's a great look into what makes Roland Roland, and it's really sad and it's really sweet, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it quite a bit, and I'm glad that I can move on and continue my journey to the tower and finally get back with Eddie and Susanna and Jake and Oi and the rest of the quartet. The last book I have here is Certain Dark Things by Silvia Moreno Garcia. So it's 4 stars overall for me. This is a novel where we are following a young woman named Atul and her human companion named Domingo. Atul is a vampire. We're in kind of a neo-noir vampire Mexico City setting. It's really fun. It was a very quick and enjoyable read. I really love Silvia Moreno Garcia's writing. I think she just writes characters that I want to read about in settings that I want to be in and I want to live in for however long she'll let me. And this was not a disappointment. I was very, very happy to finally knock this off my shelves. Okay, that's it. Those are my 8 books. Hopefully this can get edited down to not be obnoxiously long. Again, I'm so sorry about the previous month. And so hopefully we will resume our kind of regularly scheduled content with no nerves in my back screaming at me. So fingers crossed for that. Do algorithm things if you feel like it. If not, I hope you're having a great day, and I will see you next time.